Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. This month marks 10 years since what looked like another country in the region getting swept up in a whirlwind of pro-democracy revolts. But that was just the beginning for Syria. This was the start of a conflict which has been dubbed the defining war of the early 21st century. It's a battlefield for competing external powers like Iran, Turkey and Russia, one that has faded from the headlines, but civilian suffering continues. Now, today, nearly 60% of Syria's population are food insecure. Some 10-year-old children have gone their entire lives without ever sitting in a proper classroom. There are also people that have had to contend with chemical attacks, the Islamic State group, and a refugee crisis like no other. Now, France 24's Monty Francis brings you the numbers which tell a story of misery and destruction.
10 years since the start of the war in Syria, and the human toll is almost too horrific to comprehend. 400,000 people have died in what the United Nations has described as the worst man-made disaster since World War II. 5.6 million people have fled the country, often with their families in tow, trying to escape the ongoing violence. 6.6 million have been internally displaced. The country's infrastructure and ability to care for the sick and wounded has suffered unimaginable damage. In 2015, a bomb destroyed a hospital in the western city of Homs, killing 23 health staff from Doctors Without Borders and wounding 58. That year alone, 63 hospitals or clinics were bombed, 12 of which were destroyed. Children have also borne much of the agony. Since the start of the conflict, some 9,000 children have been killed. More than 700 schools have been destroyed, and 40% of the country's children now don't attend school. 12.4 million Syrians, or 60% of the population, are food insecure, not knowing where their next meal will come from. 90% live below the poverty line. Numbers that reflect a dire reality in a conflict with no end in sight.
Turning our attention to the children of the foreign fighters in the region who are unquestionably among the innocent victims of this conflict. Today, thousands of them are trapped in overcrowded camps in Syria, Iraq and Turkey, and they're living in unsanitary conditions without access to education and, at times, basic healthcare. James Vecina takes a close look at concerns surrounding these children languishing in camps and whether they should be repatriated to their countries.
It's their fourth winter in this camp in northeastern Syria. Here, 200 French children have been rounded up with several dozens of other European minors. The living conditions are rough. All these children have, or had, jihadi parents.
It's better in France. This is just a camp. It's tough. It's cold.
What do you want?
I want to go back to my grandparents. I have a room there. I want to live there.
What can you remember about Paris?
I remember going to play with my grandfather in the park.
Over the past 2 years, France has repatriated 35 children. Priority goes to orphans and those in fragile health. It's a slow but cautious process due to concerns over the children's upbringing and whether they could pose a threat to the country. The Kurdish authorities who control the camp have allowed us to film sewing and hairdressing lessons, a way of keeping girls busy and a step away from the strict rules they lived by before the fall of the Islamic State group. This 14-year-old is counting the days until she's allowed to leave.
You're not free. You can't leave the camp. It's like being in prison. It's tiring. When you spent almost 4 years here and you see other children leaving, you wonder when it will be your turn. Personally, I do not feel like I'm a danger to others. I haven't done anything. We didn't do anything. I don't know why people are afraid of us. But if leaving means being separated from my family while my mum's put in prison, then I don't want that.
Fearing they're still radicalised, France has barred mothers from returning. When we last gained access to a camp 2 years ago, most mothers didn't want to be separated from their children. This time we bumped into Emily Konig, a former jihadi recruiter. This video shows her handling a gun, propaganda for the group. She eventually let her 3 children return to France. They went home in January.
It's not a fun choice to make. If I was only thinking about myself, I would have kept them here with me. But if I think about what's best for them, then I send them back. My youngest one has breathing issues. I can't keep her here in these conditions. My son will be starting year 2 in September.
But France is worried that your children may be brainwashed.
Brainwashed? How? My son is crazy about Dragon Ball Z. He sings all the songs from cartoons. If he was brainwashed, he wouldn't be singing cartoon songs.
This other mother allowed her children to go back a year and a half ago.
I know they're attending school. My daughter's doing very, very well. They get on well with their foster families. They really like the person taking care of them. I don't see why they should be in prison with me. I was the one who decided to come here. They shouldn't be paying for it too.
Humanitarian organisations and several MPs are calling for children to be repatriated with their mothers. They say they're concerned about the children's well-being and don't want them to develop any desires for revenge. And while the UN says France can't shy away from the responsibilities it holds towards French children, authorities will for now be sticking to repatriations on a case-by-case basis.
I would now like for us to hear from a Syrian voice who's had to deal with everything from fleeing his country to receiving death threats to fearing for the safety of his family. All this for shedding light on the atrocities taking place inside Syria. Feras Fayyad, the director of Oscar-nominated and Emmy Award-winning documentary Last Men in Aleppo. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Middle East Matters. Feras, is there any regret in the uprisings that started 10 years ago in your country, given the scale of destruction?
I've been documenting Syria for the last 10 years, and from the beginning of the revolution, we lost our home, and I received the threat. Even my family, I received the threat. But this is no regret for that, because this is for the change for Syria. I think everyone went to the street from the Syrian, not regretting that moment, because we all dreaming for change and for better future for Syria.
So you've been fighting for this better future, but 10 years later, Bashar al-Assad is still there.
Yes, it's make us all angry, and it's make us all the time we want to keep fighting. After all the loss that we lost, not easy to say yes for his continues, and that need a pressure from the international community to Bashar al-Assad.
You mentioned the international community. Would you say that, you speak to Syrians all the time, would you say that they blame the proxies, the other powers, as much as they blame Assad? I'm talking about the Iranians, the Russians, the Turks.
The Syrian regime, the firstly responsible about this crime, but also all the parties who support the Syrian regime is responsible about these crimes, because they are silent on this and they don't do anything, and they also participate in killing the Syrians. So it's need a movement for that, and the justice process is one of the hope for the Syrian.
Speaking of hope, you have previously said that the white helmets, they really made you believe in humanity. Before I ask you a question about that, let's take a look at a clip from that documentary together. Feras, we just watched a clip of that documentary, but years on, it feels like the white helmets aren't really getting much attention, neither is the war in Syria.
Yeah, unfortunately, partly of that, the propaganda machine that tried like to take attention from the great work of the white helmets, who saves thousands of lives, who kept doing it for saving lives. And personally, I've been experiencing that as a documentary filmmaker who documented and filming with the white helmets. And it's not easy to fight this propaganda machine. It's strong enough to destroy any reputation, but in general, those people, they doing right, and I encourage the international community to all the time think about them, because this is the only hope for the Syrians.
We do need to think about them. Let's very briefly talk about you, like many Syrians, the fact that you've personally experienced loss because of this conflict and even prior to that. And I do have some jarring figures. Almost 1 in 2 young people say they've lost a close friend or a relative in this war. Tell us about your experience very briefly, if you can, for us.
Yes, as many Syrians, I lost a member of my family, but it's not just in this current war. It's been It's been from the 80. From the 80s until now. I lost my uncle in 83 because he's expressed his opinion against the Syrian regime. We lost in this current uprising. We lost our home. My family now is living in outside of the home. I lost my cousin also, and but the same things. Just imagine half of the nations have the same suffer.
Feras, one word if you can. Any hope for you being able to go back on Syrian soil one day?
I hope if there is a pressure from the international society community on the Bashar al-Assad government and removing him and driving him to the court, then will be hope to back. Otherwise, Syria will be a dangerous place until Assad removed.
So we will have to hold on to some hope. Feras Fayyad, thank you so much for sharing your story with us here on Middle East Matters, and thank you for watching. Do stay tuned.